Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I want you to imagine something for a second. Just picture walking past an old, rusted industrial building right in the middle of your city.
Okay, yeah, like an abandoned warehouse type of thing.
Right. The windows are all boarded up, weeds are growing up through the cracked asphalt in the parking lot. From the outside, it looks completely abandoned.
Just a relic from another era.
Yeah, you would assume nothing has happened inside that building for decades. But then, you walk right up to the brick wall, you press your ear against the cold stone, and you hear it.
Hear what?
A low, constant hum. You realize the machinery inside hasn't stopped at all. It just moved underground. The assembly lines are still running at full capacity, 24 hours a day, churning out the very same product, just totally out of sight.
And that is a chilling image. It really captures the reality we're looking at today with staggering precision.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Because we are dealing with something that the modern world assumes is an ancient relic, right? Something we've just evolved past. But it is actually operating in secret, constantly, in every single human life.
Which brings us to the mission for this conversation. We really need to dismantle a very popular misconception today.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when most people hear the word idolatry, they immediately picture, primitive tribes bowing down before carved wooden statues.
Right, or ancient temples filled with marble figures of Greek and Roman deities.
Yeah, we tend to think of it as an obsolete religious practice, something relegated to history books and archaeological digs. But using the texts we have gathered for this deep dive, we are going to see how the sources define this issue completely differently.
They do. They define idolatry not as some ancient religious quirk, but as the very anatomy of human ruin.
Yeah. The material argues that this is the central, defining problem of the human heart across all time periods.
So to set the stage for this analysis, we have to bring in a concept from the 16th century Genevan reformer John Calvin.
Oh, the classic Calvin quote.
Yes, he famously described the human heart as a perpetual factory of idols. So the machinery you described in your analogy never stops.
It's always humming.
Always. In our unregenerate state, meaning the condition of the human soul before it experiences spiritual rebirth, we possess this divine capacity for adoration.
Because we were made to worship.
Right. We were designed for it. But the problem is that we violently twist that capacity. We pull our adoration away from the glorious, immortal creator, and we direct it toward vaporous phantoms.
We take the heaviest, most substantial reality in the universe, and we trade it for shadows.
That's well said. So today, we are preparing a comprehensive theological diagnosis of the soul, looking closely at the mechanics of that exchange and the devastation it leaves behind.
Thinking idolatry only happens in ancient temples. It's kind of like assuming theft only happens when a man walks into a bank wearing a black domino mask.
Oh, like the classic cartoon burglar.
Yeah, the guy in the striped shirt carrying a canvas bag with a giant dollar sign printed on it.
That is a hilarious image, but it's so true. The cartoon burglar approach to diagnosing a problem.
Exactly. Well, if you were a bank manager and you train your security guards to only look for a guy in a mask holding a burlap sack, you are going to get robbed blind.
Right, by the guy in the tailored suit who is quietly embezzling millions of dollars through a computer terminal.
Yeah. So the text paints a picture of a much more sophisticated crime when it comes to human worship. It is not always obvious. It doesn't always look like formal religion.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the danger. To understand this sophisticated spiritual crime, the text points us back to the standard of worship established at Mount Sinai.
Okay, let's look at that.
It looks specifically at the first two commandments and how they are summarized and expanded upon in the Westminster Larger Catechism. We have to look at the boundaries of the law to understand the nature of the crime.
Right.
So the first commandment declares, "You shall have no other gods before me." This command regulates who we worship.
The who.
Right. It forbids allowing anything, any object, any person, any career ambition, or any internal desire to rival God in our affections. It establishes the Lord alone as the supreme object of our trust, our love, and our fear.
So that covers the who. We are commanded to worship God alone without any rivals.
Yes. But then the second commandment immediately follows and shifts the focus. It says, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image." This command regulates how we worship.
The how. That's a huge distinction.
It is. It forbids approaching the true God through human imagination or unauthorized representations. This is a crucial distinction that so many people miss. Idolatry isn't simply worshiping a false deity. It includes worshiping the true God in a false way.
Wow.
If you try to approach the creator using the unauthorized mechanisms of your own design, or if you try to reduce him to a manageable physical form, you have crossed into idolatry. You are trying to dictate the terms of engagement with the Almighty.
The source text includes a linguistic analysis regarding this that I found really fascinating. It conducts a word study contrasting two specific Greek nouns.
Oh, the eidolon and icon study.
Yeah, the word eidolon and the word icon.
So the original language provides so much clarity here. In the Greco-Roman world, the word eidolon, which is the root of our English word idol, was understood in early literature to be a phantom.
A phantom.
Yeah. In Homeric poetry, for example, it was used to describe a ghost or a shade of a dead person in the underworld. It is a shadow, a mere reflection.
So it lacks actual substance.
Completely. It is vapor. By contrast, the Greek word icon refers to an exact, concrete representation and manifestation of reality. Like the image stamped on a Roman coin was an icon of the emperor. It carried weight and authority.
The text points out the tragic irony regarding human origins here. Humanity was originally created in the Garden of Eden to be the imago Dei, the true icon of God.
Right.
We were made to be the concrete, living representation of his glory and his character on the earth. But fallen humanity takes that magnificent design and instead begins manufacturing idola.
We manufacture phantoms.
Yeah. We trade substance for smoke, we take our capacity to reflect the living God, and we use it to chase after ghosts that have no life in them whatsoever.
We do, and we try to extract life from things that are completely dead.
So what does this mean for you, the listener, in a practical sense? I want you to consider what functional treasures dictate the daily choices you make.
Because it's happening every day.
Right. The texts define our functional gods in very practical, observable terms. Your idol is whatever you fear losing the most.
Yeah.
It is whatever you obey without question when it makes demands of you. It is whatever you willingly sacrifice your time, your ethics, and your family to obtain or maintain.
That's a heavy evaluation.
It is.
Mm.
If there is something in your life that you look at and say, I cannot live without that, I must have it to be okay, that thing has become your functional God.
It acts as a false savior. It makes promises of salvation and peace that only God has the authority and the power to keep.
Money, right?
Yes. Money whispers that it will keep you safe from all disaster. Career success promises that you will finally have worth and validation. But because these things are idola, because they're empty phantoms, they can never bear the crushing weight of godhood.
They just aren't designed for it.
No. So when you lean your entire existence on them, they inevitably collapse.
Which raises a massive question. If an idol is an empty phantom, an illusion that cannot actually satisfy the human soul, why would rational creatures willingly trade reality for a shadow?
It doesn't make logical sense.
Right. Why would anyone give up a fountain of living water for a broken cup that holds nothing but dirt? This leads us directly into the text's analysis of the first chapter of the book of Romans.
Romans chapter 1 provides the terrifying logic of human rebellion laid bare. The Apostle Paul lays out an airtight, divine courtroom indictment against humanity.
He details the specific mechanics of treason, right, in verses 18 through 25.
He does. The text establishes human culpability right out of the gate, through the Greek phrase nontes don theon, which translates to although they knew God.
So that completely shatters the popular excuse of ignorance.
Exactly. Paul argues that God has provided a clear, undeniable general revelation of himself in the created order. The sheer scale of the cosmos, the intricate design of the physical laws, the reality of human conscience, all of it screams of a creator.
The knowledge is universally available.
It is. But the text says humanity actively suppresses that truth in unrighteousness.
We hold it down.
Yeah.
We see the truth of God in creation, and we push it beneath the surface like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
That's a great way to put it. And the result of that active, aggressive suppression is intellectual arrogance. The text says, professing to be wise, they became fools. It describes a transition from internal, willful darkness to outward, blinding pride. The unregenerate mind genuinely thinks it is ascending to enlightenment, creating sophisticated philosophies and societies, while it is actually plunging into absolute futility.
The mind becomes darkened because it has shut out the only source of true light. I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because this goes against everything we are taught in modern secular society.
Oh, completely.
Our culture teaches an upward evolutionary slope when it comes to human origins and the development of religion. The standard narrative is that ancient primitive man started out terrified of lightning and thunder, worshiping beasts and nature spirits.
Yeah, the classic caveman narrative.
Right. And then slowly, over thousands of years of societal evolution, we became more civilized. We became more enlightened, eventually developing ethical monotheism. And now we are moving beyond religion entirely into pure scientific rationalism.
That is the textbook story.
But the source text points out that the grammar of Romans 1 completely inverts this narrative. How does the text challenge that upward slope?
It challenges it directly through the specific verbs Paul uses in the passage. The central active verb in this section of Romans is alaxin, which means they exchanged.
They exchanged,
Uh-huh.
okay.
This indicates a definitive, historical, and volitional act of rebellion. Humanity did not start in the mud, worshipping frogs, and slowly climb up to the concept of one God. According to the theological framework of the text, we started at the absolute top.
Right in the garden.
Yes. Humanity started in the garden with the clear, unclouded knowledge of the one true God. And then, due to the fall and the resulting corruption of human nature, we devolved downward. We actively, intentionally traded the incorruptible glory of God for corruptible images.
The irony is staggering when you connect the dots back to the creation account in Genesis.
It is the ultimate inversion of the divine order. Man was created to stand upright, bearing the image of God, and to rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the earth.
But in Romans 1,
In the devolution of Romans 1, man is depicted bowing down to the creeping things. He worships the beast he was commanded to rule.
man, that is not upward evolution. That is a catastrophic collapse of the human soul.
Absolutely.
We exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And the result is a total reorientation of our worship toward the dirt.
Well said.
And this catastrophic collapse is not just restricted to pagan nations outside the camp. That is the other shocking part of the historical narrative found in these sources.
Right, Israel wasn't immune.
They demonstrate that this spiritual disease rapidly infected the covenant community of Israel. Idolatry was an inside job just as much as an outside threat.
The historical narrative of the Old Testament shows us that the visible, gathered people of God are highly susceptible to the exact same factory of idols. They had the law, they had the prophets, they had the covenant, and they still built the altars.
We see this so clearly in the golden calf incident in Exodus 32. This is such a misunderstood story in popular culture, I think.
Oh, definitely. People gloss over the details.
Israel is at the base of Mount Sinai. They have just been delivered from Egypt through miraculous plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. Moses goes up on the mountain to receive the law from God, and he is gone for 40 days.
And the people get restless.
Yeah. The anxiety sets in. They demand a visible, tangible God to lead them. Aaron, the high priest, gathers their gold jewelry and fashions a calf. But here's the crucial point from the text. Israel was not consciously renouncing Yahweh in order to worship an Egyptian deity like Apis.
No, they weren't.
They were actually attempting to hold a corrupted festival to Yahweh. Aaron literally proclaims, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord."
That detail changes the entire complexion of the event. They were attempting to worship the true God who brought them out of Egypt, but they were doing it through a man-made image.
Right.
They were using the familiar religious forms they'd absorbed during their 400 years of slavery in Egypt. They wanted a God they could see, a God they could manage, and a God that made them feel secure in the absence of Moses.
And God's reaction to this is absolute terrifying fury. He threatens to wipe them out entirely.
Yes.
It proves that sincere, emotionally charged, enthusiastic worship is entirely unacceptable to God if it's divorced from his revealed will. You cannot worship God in your own terms.
You really can't.
You can't bring a statue of a calf to the creator of the universe and say, "I have decided this is how I will honor you."
That episode stands as a perpetual warning to the covenant community. As the biblical narrative continues through the period of the judges and into the era of the monarchy, idolatry rarely appears as a sudden, overt renunciation of faith.
It's sneakier than that.
Much sneakier. The text describes it as a slow, creeping infection. The theological term is syncretism.
Syncretism. Right.
The Israelites would blend the covenant worship of Yahweh with the Canaanite fertility rites of the surrounding nations. They wanted the covenant security of the Lord, but they also wanted the immediate sensual gratification and the agricultural promises of the Baals.
It's like hedging your bets in an investment portfolio.
That's a great analogy.
You keep Yahweh for national security in the afterlife, but you sacrifice to Baal to make sure it rains on your crops this season.
Exactly. It is spiritual pragmatism, and it becomes deeply entrenched in the life of the nation. Kings like Jeroboam set up golden calves at the cities of Bethel and Dan.
And he didn't do that to explicitly replace God.
No, he did it to create political convenience. He wanted to stop his citizens from traveling to Jerusalem to worship, fearing they would shift their political loyalty back to the house of David.
Wow. Politics driving worship.
Yes. And then Ahab and his queen Jezebel took it further and institutionalized Baal worship as state religion. False worship became hopelessly tangled up with national identity, political stability, and economic anxiety.
But God doesn't look at this syncretism and view it as a minor misunderstanding.
Not at all.
The text brings in the visceral, aggressive language of the prophets, who act as God's prosecuting attorneys against the nation. They do not just offer mild correction. They use devastating mockery.
The mockery is intense.
Look at the prophet Isaiah. He mocks the sheer absurdity of the idolater's logic. He describes a man who goes into the forest and cuts down a tree. He takes half of the wood, builds a fire, warms his hands, and bakes his bread over the coals.
Makes sense so far.
But then he takes the exact same piece of wood from the exact same tree, carves it into a figure, bows down to it, and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God."
The prophet is exposing the complete collapse of rationality under the influence of misdirected worship.
Makes no sense.
None. The human mind becomes fundamentally irrational when it tries to turn firewood into a savior.
But the prophets do not just mock the intellectual error. The emotional weight of the betrayal is brought out vividly by prophets like Hosea and Ezekiel.
Yeah, that imagery is tough to read.
They describe this exchange not as a bad theological calculation, but as spiritual adultery. They portray the nation of Israel as a wife who leaves a faithful, loving, providing husband to run after abusive lovers. It is marital infidelity.
It is a deeply personal, relational offense against the covenant love of God.
The imagery is graphic and heartbreaking because God is displaying the grief and the righteous anger of a betrayed spouse.
Which brings us to a terrifying question about the mechanics of the human soul. What happens to the person who commits this spiritual adultery? What is the internal consequence for the individual when they engage in this factory of idols?
The sources outline a very specific consequence. It is the law of assimilation.
Yes. Psalm 115 lays out this principle with absolute clarity. The psalmist describes these idols of silver and gold as the work of human hands.
They have mouths but cannot speak.
Right. They have eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear. They are completely dead, inert matter, but then comes the devastating verdict at the end of the passage. Those who make them become like them.
You assimilate to the object of your worship.
You do. The text unpacks this as an ontological atrophy.
Ontological atrophy, that's a heavy phrase.
When we use a phrase like ontological atrophy, we are talking about the actual substance of your being wasting away. Think of a muscle that is never used, or a sensory organ that sits in darkness until it loses the ability to process light.
Okay, I track with that.
When you worship a dead, deaf, and blind phantom, your own spiritual faculties begin to shut down. You assimilate to the nature of your God. You become spiritually deaf to the law of God and blind to the beauty of Christ.
Your soul conforms to the emptiness and the deadness of the thing you have placed at the center of your life.
Yes.
The language used in the original text to describe this dynamic is incredibly intense. The Hebrew and Greek terminology for worship words like abad, shaka, and elantrazin imply total economic and physical subjugation.
It's not casual.
No. It is not just attending a religious service once a week or singing a few songs. The words literally mean to serve as a slave or to bow down in total submission. It is enslavement.
Enslavement.
When you choose an idol, you are handing over the keys to your existence. You are becoming a slave to the phantom you created.
And that reality of enslavement leads to the most sobering mechanism of judgment described back in Romans chapter 1. It is centered around the Greek verb parageuken,
Which means
this translates to God gave them over. God's judgment against idolatry doesn't always look like lightning bolts from the sky. Often it takes the form of divine abandonment.
divine abandonment.
He removes his restraining grace, he takes his hands off the steering wheel, and he hands the person over to the master they have chosen.
So the moral degradation we see in a society, the chaos, the breakdown of relationships, the unhinged desires, that is not the trigger that causes God to become angry and send judgment.
According to the argument of the text, the moral degradation is the evidence that his wrath has already arrived.
Wow.
The wrath is the giving over. He allows the idolatrous heart to consume itself entirely. The society falls apart into chaos because the foundation of its worship is an empty phantom.
Because when you build a house on vapor, it collapses.
Exactly. The societal rot is just the natural consequence of abandoning the source of all order and life.
We need to pivot and apply this to our current context, I think. We have talked extensively about ancient history, about golden calves and Roman statues. But we need to examine the glowing altars of the 21st century.
We do.
Because the factory of idols John Calvin described is still running at full capacity today.
The outward forms change with technology and culture, but the underlying machinery of the human heart remains exactly the same. We still elevate created things to the position of functional godhood.
Let's look at the secular altars the text points out. Mammon, or the worship of wealth, is a primary one.
Always has been.
This is the pursuit of money not as a tool, but as ultimate security and salvation. The source notes the quantifiable ruin this causes, pointing out that American households carry over $17.5 trillion in debt.
17.5 trillion.
It's a staggering number. Why does that exist? Because we are enslaving ourselves to the frantic pursuit of transient goods. We sacrifice our peace of mind, our marriages, and our ethical standards to appease the god of acquisition. We buy things we don't need with money. We don't have to impress people we don't know. All because we believe the accumulation of stuff will finally make us secure.
And another massive secular altar mentioned in our sources is our devices.
Oh, the screens.
The text cites demographic studies indicating that people spend over 7 hours daily staring at screens.
7 hours.
They're consuming an endless river of entertainment, outrage, and digital noise while their Bibles gather dust on the shelf. The smartphone screen becomes the oracle we consult for comfort when we are anxious.
We look to it for identity when we feel lost.
Yes, and for constant distraction from the reality of our own mortality, we give it our first waking thoughts and our last conscious moments before sleep.
Now, we are walking into some highly debated cultural territory here regarding the ideological altars mentioned in the text.
This is where it gets heavy.
Hold on, before we go further, I need to make something super clear to the listener. We are not taking a political side here. We are not endorsing a specific political party or platform. We're unpacking how the author of our source material views these modern movements through the theological lens of idolatry. We are simply reporting the author's argument impartially.
Just laying out what the text says. So the source material explicitly classifies certain modern sociological frameworks, specifically focusing on critical race theory and various social justice crusades as ideological idols.
Okay, how does the author frame that?
The text critiques these movements not as political disagreements over public policy, but as secular, Marxist, false religions. The author's argument is that these frameworks attempt to replace the biblical gospel of blood atonement and divine forgiveness with a system of perpetual grievance and human works.
They function as an alternative religion.
Yes, with their own rigid definitions of original sin, their own requirements for atonement, and their own standards for justification. The text argues that because these systems offer no actual grace and no final forgiveness, they act as a functional idol that displaces the supremacy of Christ's finished work.
The text is unsparing in its critique of secular culture, for sure, but it does not let the church off the hook either. It turns the spotlight right onto the conservative church pew.
It does.
How do these phantoms infiltrate evangelicalism?
Well, they hide under the guise of religious duty and respectable methodology. One of the most pervasive evangelical idols listed in the text is pragmatism.
Pragmatism.
This is the idolatry of numbers, metrics, and visible success. Churches start measuring their faithfulness by attendance figures, annual budgets, and online reach. The slow, quiet, difficult work of biblical discipleship is displaced by whatever pragmatic method works fastest to draw a crowd.
The functional question in the boardroom changes from what has God commanded us to do in His Word to what will the religious consumer tolerate and pay for?
And when that shift happens, the sovereign consumer has completely displaced the sovereign Lord.
That is sobering.
The text also heavily critiques the idol of subjective emotional highs. This occurs when believers chase spectacular experiences, goosebumps, or manufactured emotional atmospheres, quietly displacing the sufficiency, authority, and clarity of the written scriptures.
The feeling becomes the authority rather than the text.
Right.
The source also takes direct aim at the prosperity gospel.
It does. It describes the prosperity gospel as a theological system that treats God as a cosmic bellhop.
A cosmic bellhop.
Yes, it is a utilitarian manipulation of the divine to acquire the true idols of the human heart: material wealth, physical health, and earthly comfort.
In this system, God is not the treasure. He is the mechanism you use to get the treasure.
Right. It uses the creator as a tool to gain the creature, which is the very definition of idolatry.
The text also points out how historical church practices that obscure the unique mediation of Christ are idolatrous. It specifically identifies the veneration of saints or Mary within Roman Catholicism,
Yes, it looks closely at 1 Timothy 2.5.
which states unequivocally that there is only one God, and there was only one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus.
The argument here is that directing prayers, vows, or seeking spiritual intercession from created beings, no matter how holy they were in life, blurs the line into worship.
It robs Christ of his unique glory as the sole high priest who bridges the gap between a holy God and sinful humanity.
And every single one of these modern idols, whether it is the secular worship of money, the ideological worship of cultural theories, or the evangelical worship of pragmatism, proves that the human heart cannot cure itself.
It just keeps manufacturing.
Right. External behavior management, trying to try harder, or passing new laws is utterly useless against a factory that is fundamentally broken at the core.
So if the disease is this catastrophic, if our hearts are constantly churning out false gods that enslave us and invite divine wrath, the conversation must turn to the remedy.
We have to get to the cure.
And the remedy presented in the text is not a new program. It is not a 12-step process. It is a person.
The text introduces us to the true image, where humanity catastrophically traded God's glory for a shadow, for an empty eidolon. Jesus Christ himself is the true icon.
Paul writes in Colossians 1:15 that Christ is the image of the invisible God. And the author of Hebrews declares in chapter 1, verse 3, that the Son is the exact imprint of his nature.
In the incarnation, God doesn't give us a lifeless statue made of gold or wood. He gives us his eternal Son, clothed in human flesh.
Yeah.
Christ perfectly reflects the glory of God because he possesses the very nature of God. He perfectly obeys the law where humanity rebelled. He succeeds completely where the first Adam failed miserably. He lived the life of perfect worship that we refuse to live.
This leads to the absolute climax of the source's theological argument, the cross.
The cross changes everything.
The text presents the crucifixion not just as a tragic martyrdom or an inspiring example of sacrificial love, but as the ultimate, definitive, idol-smashing event in all of human history. The doctrine of penal substitution is central to understanding this.
To explain the mechanics of penal substitution, think of a courtroom where an unpayable fine has been levied against a guilty criminal.
Okay.
The holy wrath and the terrifying divine abandonment that our spiritual treason deserved, that giving over we discussed in Romans 1, was fully absorbed by Christ. He hung on the cursed tree and acted as our substitute.
He took the penalty for our idolatry onto himself.
Yes, the wrath of the Father against the factory of idols was exhausted on the Son.
That sufficient, completed atonement shatters all the false gods we try to bring to the table, especially the gods of human merit and self-righteousness.
Absolutely.
The cross proves that we cannot save ourselves. We cannot offer our moral record, our good intentions, or our religious rituals to appease a holy God. Christ has done it all. The debt is paid in full by him alone.
The source draws a sharp, uncompromising line here, contrasting this sufficient atonement with what it identifies as erroneous theological systems that attempt to share the glory of salvation.
Right, it explicitly rejects Arminianism.
It does. The text describes Arminian theology as a system that worships a frustrated deity, a God who desperately wants to save people, but is ultimately reliant on human permission, human free will, and human cooperation to get the job done.
The author argues this diminishes the sovereignty of God.
Yes. The text also rejects the sacramental system of Roman Catholicism, describing it as a works infusion. It argues that Catholic theology demands ongoing human cooperation, penance, and participation in the sacraments to maintain or achieve justification.
The theological conviction of the text is adamant. Salvation belongs to the Lord alone.
From beginning to end.
It is entirely a sovereign work of grace. You cannot share the glory of your salvation with your own free will, your own intellect, or your own religious efforts. God will not share his glory with another, and the cross leaves no room for human boasting.
So we have diagnosed the disease, we have looked at the historical infection in Israel, and we have seen the brutal, beautiful remedy of the cross.
The question remains, though, how do we apply this massive theology directly to our daily lives?
How do we address the factory operating inside us right now?
Well, the source quotes the Puritan theologian John Owen, who issued a famous, severe warning to believers. Be killing sin, or it will be killing you.
Be killing sin.
That's intense. The practical application of this theology is the daily, ruthless mortification of sin. You have to take an axe to the high places of your own heart. You have to interrogate your own motives.
You really do.
You have to ask yourself hard, uncomfortable questions. Am I seeking the approval of men in my career, or am I operating in the fear of the Lord? You cannot serve two masters.
And the text highlights believers' baptism as the initial public covenantal declaration of this reality.
Right.
When a person is baptized, it is a visible physical sign of dying to the worldly idols, being buried with Christ, and rising to walk in newness of life, legally severed from those old phantom masters.
Baptism is a decisive public break, but, the text does not leave us with a light, easy conclusion.
No, it doesn't.
It presents a chilling eschatological reality to sober us. It points to the book of Revelation, specifically Revelation 9:20.
That verse is haunting.
The passage describes a future period of horrific divine judgments falling upon the earth. And yet, even while being crushed by plagues and disaster, the text says unregenerate humanity still refuses to repent of the works of their hands. They will not give up worshiping their idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood.
That is a terrifying psychological reality. It means that hardship, suffering, economic collapse, and even direct divine judgment are not enough to change the human heart.
Pain alone only hardens a person. You can lose everything to your idol and still refuse to let it go.
Unless the Holy Spirit violently captivates your affections with the supreme beauty and majesty of Jesus Christ, the phantoms of this world will never lose their paralyzing grip on your soul.
You can't just fix it yourself.
No, you cannot simply decide to stop loving your idols through sheer willpower. A greater love must forcefully expel the lesser ones.
Thomas Chalmers called it the expulsive power of a new affection.
Exactly. Only seeing the glory of Christ can break the spell of the phantom.
You have to hear the machinery running behind that rusted wall in your own life. You have to recognize the phantom for what it is: smoke, vapor, and a lie that will demand everything and give nothing. Look to the true image. Look to Christ and live.
It leaves you with an uncomfortable evaluation for tomorrow morning when you look at your calendar for the day and you look at your bank statement for the month and you see exactly where your time, your money, and your stress are going.
Yeah.
If a complete stranger looked at that data, who or what would they say is the functional God of your life?
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We will see you next time.